On October 7th, Israel was brutally attacked by Hamas terrorists in the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. Over 1,200 people were murdered and over 200 hostages taken into Gaza. 101 still remain in captivity. On October 8th, exactly one day later, Israel was attacked from the north by Hezbollah, and since then, Israel has faced an existential war on 7 fronts. Actually 8 fronts when considering the wave of anti-Semitism and the attacks against Jews worldwide. This has culminated in the International Criminal Court issuing arrest warrants, not against the terrorists and those bankrolling them, but against Israel's democratically elected leaders, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. And now, in an even more twisted turn of events, the IDF has warned today that Israeli soldiers fighting genocidal terrorists who seek to wipe out all Israelis may be in danger of traveling abroad after anti-Israel groups filed complaints against them for alleged war crimes. ILTV's sister news site Ynet revealed that there is concern in Israel and in the IDF that soldiers will now be detained or tried based on the ICC ruling. In 8 cases, soldiers who traveled abroad were recalled over fears they would be detained or questioned. And IDF reservists are now being told to check with the Foreign Ministry about their travel plans. Soldiers are now being identified and targeted by anti-Israel activists from their social media posts during their service in Gaza. And while Israeli officials do not believe the ICC will go after lower-ranking soldiers, they are concerned higher-ranking officials could be targeted next. An absolute disgrace. No other country is subject to this, showcasing once again the hypocrisy and the anti-Semitism engulfing the world's institutions when it comes to the only Jewish state and the only democracy in the Middle East defending itself against terrorism. Meanwhile, a leader that is finally standing up to such hypocrisy. Israelis expressed their gratitude to U.S. President-elect Donald Trump for his strong statement about the release of the hostages, which has sparked hope for a new deal. 101 hostages are still being held by Hamas in Gaza. It's now been 425 days. Let's take a look. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Tuesday evening thanked U.S. President-elect Donald Trump for his statement demanding that all the hostages be released ahead of his January 20th inauguration, or Hamas would face severe consequences.
I want to thank President Trump for his strong statement yesterday about the need for Hamas to release the hostages, the responsibility of Hamas, and this adds another force to our continuing effort to release all the hostages. Thank you, President Trump.
Netanyahu added that Trump put the emphasis in the right place on Hamas and not on the Israeli government, as is customary in some places. Trump on Monday posted to his Truth Social account and said there would be all hell to pay in the Middle East against those in charge who perpetrated these atrocities against humanity if the 101 hostages being held are not released. Israeli President Yitzhak Herzog also posted on X and thanked and blessed Trump, saying, "We all pray for the moment we see our sisters and brothers back home." Other politicians from across the political spectrum also joined in, expressing their gratitude. Imagine if all Western leaders had issued such powerful statements like this, the hostages might have been home already. Instead, you have the United Kingdom hosting Qatari leaders today who harbored Hamas for years while saying they would arrest Israeli leaders should they set foot on UK soil. And joining us now with more on the war in Gaza and the latest developments in the region is Brian Katuli, Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute. Brian, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So the war in Lebanon may be temporarily on pause, but it doesn't mean that the war is over. And there are a lot of developments in the Middle East. Let's start with Gaza and Trump's statement about the hostages. I mean, do you think this will have a real impact on Hamas or on Iran and Qatar and Turkey, who are, let's say, supporters of Hamas?
Probably not. I mean, these are vicious terrorist groups, Hamas, and some of their supporters. I think the other question is whether it'll have an impact on the current Israeli government, which, as you know, has sort of fallen apart over the last few months because of divisions amongst its own leaders about this very same issue, about whether there's a clear end game plan in Gaza. You see the protests in your own country about people who are really discontent with the current leadership in Israel. So there's, I think, a collective shared shame and blame here about what's gone on about these hostages. My heart goes out to their families. I don't think a statement by Trump himself will actually change those dynamics, which again, at its core, starts with this vicious terrorist group, Hamas. But then it is, these hostages held for hundreds of days is the product of poor leadership in the Middle East, in Qatar, Egypt, the US, as well as the current Israeli government.
And in Lebanon, the ceasefire is holding, but we already see that Hezbollah is breaching it, and Israel is being urged by the Biden administration not to respond. In other words, let Hezbollah resume its terror activities unimpeded. I mean, what do you make of this?
I think it was a weak ceasefire when it was announced. I think the balance of forces, the fact that Israel's been attacked for more than a year by Hezbollah. I mean, this is a longer story, too, that goes all the way back, I think, to Tehran and its links to the axis of resistance, so-called, that Iran has across the region. So I saw this as a temporary pause. I mean, I hope it holds because everyone would like there to be peace. But the simple fact of the matter is Israel's threatened, as you mentioned, from 7 different sides in this war of attrition. The other problem is the failure of leadership in the Israeli government for not actually having a clear plan to build partnerships across the region. I spent a lot of time in places like Riyadh and Abu Dhabi recently, and there's just dismay about the overall situation that Iran is provoking here with Hezbollah and Hamas, but also dismay about the poor leadership they see from not just Washington, D.C. only, but also from Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, where there is nothing more than a reactive crisis management plan, which is trying to protect its own citizens, but doesn't really have a vision for what's next and what are the opportunities around the region.
And I want to turn now to Syria. A lot of developments on this end. It's quite a mess over there. The so-called rebels taking over Aleppo and advancing to Homs. And now Iran has announced it might be sending troops to help Assad's regime. Can you maybe make sense of it all? And how is this going to affect Israel should Iran actually send troops into Syria?
I think, Syria has been a threat to Israel and is one of these pieces of the equation for Iran's axis of resistance. It's got millions of people who don't agree with the Assad regime or the regimes that back it, Russia and Iran. It's a mess, as you said. I think this is a chronic condition. It could lead to an uptick of increased threats, unfortunately, to Israel. I think Israel's military has been quite capable in trying to thwart with pretty stunning and important action inside of Syria. Even before the campaign in Lebanon, if you recall, Israeli forces actually going in on the ground in addition to airstrikes in Syria and taking care of business to try to protect Israel's citizens. It's important that it continues to do that. But all of these different pieces, the different Islamist groups that are part of the opposition in the northwest, the Kurdish groups, and the fact that perhaps not Iranian troops themselves, forces, but Iranian-backed militias from Iraq are coming in. It's this vortex, which it's been like for the last several years, could threaten Israel's security, but I wouldn't, given that Israel has a strong military and it defends its own citizens, I think it'll be okay. What we need, though, is a clearer strategy, not only from the United States, but from the current Israeli government about what it's going to do long-term to protect its people.
Absolutely. So a clear vision for the future is what's needed across the Middle East. Hopefully with the new Trump administration, we'll see that coming from Washington and from Jerusalem. Brian, thank you so much for your analysis today.
Great to be with you.
And family members of American hostage Omer Neutra held a memorial service in New York days after the IDF confirmed that he was killed by Hamas on October 7th and his body held in Gaza ever since. Omer's mother spoke at the service saying that for a whole year she prayed in the morning twice, once for herself and once for her son. She said, "I pled for a sign of life. I didn't get any." And in a truly heartbreaking moment, during the memorial service, the mother of slain American-Israeli hostage Hirsch Goldberg Pauline Rachel could be seen holding the hand of Omer's mother, Orna. Both sets of parents spoke to U.S. audiences, one at the Republican National Convention and the other at the Democratic National Conventions, calling for the release of their sons. Now neither will be returning home alive. Absolutely tragic news, and may Omer's memory be for a blessing. And this week, the children whose lives were shattered on October 7th gathered at the Museum of Tolerance in Jerusalem, along with international social media influencer and pro-Israel activist Montana Tucker, for the premiere of the documentary The Children of October 7th. ILTV attended the event and spoke to Montana Tucker about the film and her advocacy work. Let's take a look. It was a moving and emotional night at the Museum of Tolerance in Jerusalem, where former hostages, families of hostages, and child survivors of the October 7th massacre gathered for the premiere of the documentary film The Children of October 7th. The film, presented by singer, dancer, actress, and pro-Israel activist Montana Tucker, shares the testimonies of the children who survived the horrors of Hamas's massacre and showcases their incredible resilience. We just saw the premiere. I think there weren't a lot of dry eyes at the end of it. What was that experience like for you to make this film?
I said this up there and I'll say it again. I've done a lot of incredible things in my life, but this by far is the most important, the most meaningful, most impactful thing I think I'll ever be able to do. These children that I've met and these stories that I've heard will stay with me forever. And you know, it's something I say about just Israelis in general, the strength and resilience, but people don't understand like what these kids have really gone through and what they continue to go through. I interviewed them a year after the attack, and you still see the trauma and you still see what they're going through every day, the loss of their parents, the memories of them being a hostage, but their stories need to be heard and told everywhere, especially with all the denial that is going on in the world. And I live in the U.S. and I hear it every single day. And that's why I continue to come back to Israel as much as I can, to be here on the grounds to share the personal stories. And I think this documentary is going to really open a lot of people's eyes.
The screening was attended by Israel's President Yitzhak Herzog and First Lady Michal Herzog, who along with Tucker met with the children and their families ahead of the premiere. Among the many testimonies in the film is the harrowing story of 16-year-old Rotem Matias, who witnessed the murder of both of his parents by Hamas terrorists. He hid under his deceased mother's body for hours, allowing him to survive. 12-year-old Eitan Yahalomi was taken hostage into Gaza and held captive for 52 days before being released in a hostage deal. The film highlights the enduring trauma he and the other children continue to face.
My grandparents are Holocaust survivors. I grew up hearing their stories my whole life. My grandmother was 13 years old when she was taken to Auschwitz and had to see her mother get beaten up and dragged to her death at the gas chambers. And I grew up hearing those stories. And so hearing the stories of these children reminded me so much of my grandmother and the stories that she would tell me. I'm really grateful that Castina Communications asked me to be a part of this project. You know, I do a lot with children when it comes to dancing and singing. If you look through my social media, you'll see that. So this was an extension of me and to work with children in such a different way. And I'm really honored that they felt comfortable enough sharing the stories with me, and these are extremely vulnerable. I keep correcting myself. Testimonies that they shared and that they're comfortable with the world hearing, and all I can do is hope and pray that the world sees these and it really opens their eyes.
Tucker added that she hopes the film will help combat the denial of the atrocities of October 7th and the growing tides of anti-Semitism, particularly among the younger generation. Following the ceremony, Tucker, along with 16-year-old child survivor Ella Shani and the CEO of the Museum of Tolerance, Jonathan Rees, toured the museum exhibit 629 From Darkness to Light, which features personal testimonies of 25 brave women who survived the Hamas massacre.
The 0629 is a unique exhibition. It starts from the testimony of Ella Shani, who tells about how she found out that her father was dead. And it together with Ziv Koren photos, it set you in the context of what happened on that day. After that, we have more than 30 screens that each one of them has more than 40 testimonies in English, Arabic, and Hebrew of women, that each one of them tells the story of how she experienced the atrocities. The important part of it is that every day we added more and more testimonies. We have Muslims and we have Jews and we have Christians, and it doesn't matter which religion it is, whether it's Bedouins, whether it's Israelis that lives inside in the south or the north. They all experience these atrocities in different ways, and I think the exhibition helped us to connect between people from different walks of life.
Rees says, though, that the message is one of hope.
The message is trust humankind. At the end of the day, the goodness will win. The good people will win. We saw it with Harvut Hadadit, with mutual responsibility. At the end of the day, we call it from darkness to light because the light was huge. We saw how people from different walks of life helped each other to come over the vacuum that was there.
And there has been relative quiet since the initial breach of the declared ceasefire in northern Israel. There's been no new incoming rocket fire from Hezbollah after yesterday's exchange when 2 mortars were fired at Mount Dov. And Israel responded by hitting some 40 targets, mostly in South Lebanon. ILTV's Steve Leibovitz has the latest.
Defense Minister Katz says that continuing Hezbollah breaches of the ceasefire would lead to a far more aggressive policy by Israel, including attacks in other areas of Lebanon, including the capital, Beirut. Katz also warned that Israel holds Lebanon responsible for Hezbollah's actions, and the IDF will be ready to strike non-Hezbollah Lebanese targets if the ceasefire fails. Katz said there will not be any more exemptions to the state of Lebanon if until now we distinguish between Lebanon and Hezbollah. This will not continue. Prime Minister Netanyahu emphasized that it was a ceasefire and not the end of the war in Lebanon.
כרגע אנחנו בהפסקת אש, אני מציין, אנחנו בהפסקת אש, לא בסיום המלחמה. יש לנו יעד ברור להחזיר את התושבים, לשקם את הצפון. אנחנו אוכפים ביד ברזל את הפסקת האש הזאת, פועלים נגד כל הפרה, קלה כחמורה.
Netanyahu said that no ceasefire violations would be tolerated.
אנחנו מחויבים להפסקת אש, אבל אנחנו לא נסבול הפרות של הפסקת אש על ידי הצד השני, ואני גם אומר כאן בצורה הכי ברורה, אנחנו לא נחזור למצב שהיה ב6 באוקטובר. לא טפטופים ולא זרזופים ולא שום דבר. הצפון יהיה שקט, הצפון ישגשג, הצפון יפרח, והצפון יהיה בטוח.
A day after Hezbollah fired mortar shells at northern Israel and the IDF struck over 20 sites in Lebanon, there were no reports of cross-border attacks. But inside Lebanon, the IDF remains active, degrading Hezbollah assets and preventing the return of gunmen to villages near the Israeli border. The Mountain Brigade is active on Mount Dov, where they destroyed Hezbollah infrastructure and removed threats from the area. IDF Chief Halevi conducted an assessment with the Northern Command. Halevi said that many operatives in the south were killed or fled, and the area is completely free of Hezbollah fighters. He said the mission is to make sure they are not able to return.
And while the ceasefire with Hezbollah has offered a glimmer of hope for residents of northern Israel, their return home still brings about concern and hesitation. ILTV's Ariela Echiani has more.
Drone footage from Monday reveals a harsh reality in Israel's northern communities bordering Lebanon. Months of Hezbollah rocket fire have left homes destroyed, towns like Metula and Menara scarred, and residents displaced. Since October, cross-border attacks by the Iran-backed Hezbollah have killed 45 civilians in northern Israel and the Golan Heights. Approximately 60,000 residents were forced to evacuate, and most still haven't returned.
הלב מאוד רוצה להיות פה. אנחנו הגענו לפה במטרה להקים כאן בית. אבל אני לא יודעת, אני לא יכולה לסמוך על האום, אני לא יכולה לסמוך על צבא לבנון. זה לא צבא שלנו שיושב לי פה מחוץ לחלון, אני לא יודעת.
The truce, which began on November 27th, offers a fragile hope. Israel agreed to halt offensive operations while Lebanon pledged to prevent attacks by armed groups, yet tensions remain high. Just this week, Hezbollah launched missiles at Israeli positions in the disputed Sheba farms, citing alleged ceasefire violations. Israel's military confirmed the strikes but reported no casualties. Meanwhile, families like in Belz face an uncertain future, torn between a desire to return home and fears of renewed violence.
And Americans for Ben-Gurion University are preparing for their annual Ben-Gurion Day in the United States in honor of the founding father of Israel and former President David Ben-Gurion. Now let's hear more about this inspiring event from Doug Sesserman, CEO of Americans for Ben-Gurion University.
Ultimately, this is a very important year for the American diaspora Jewish community to support Israel. And Ben-Gurion Day in the USA is an outstanding vehicle.
In the heart of the Negev stands Ben-Gurion University, the materialized vision of Israel's first president, David Ben-Gurion. The university serves as a catalyst of growth, not only for the Negev region, but for Israel as a whole. Ben-Gurion's vision for Israel was revolutionary, and yet his message and teachings on the resilience of the Negev stand as relevant now as ever before.
On October 7th, the Israel people and the Jewish people were tested. David Ben-Gurion used to say that it is in the Negev that Israel will be tested, and how prophetic a statement that appears today. So we know that the resilience of the country, which it's always had and has demonstrated incredibly currently, is at the forefront of our minds going forward. And it's important for us here in the United States to recognize our role in supporting Israel into the future.
Ben-Gurion University of the Negev is not only a reflection of our past, but it's also fostering the future of Israel.
Sometimes it's very difficult to see the light in the darkness that we're currently in. But there is no question about it that the university represents a migdalor, a beacon of light that emanates from the Negev desert and shines bright and hopeful for the future of Israel. You see it in our education of our students, the next generation of Israelis, and the education of the international students who take courses in English at the university that go back to their home countries as ambassadors to Israel.
David Ben-Gurion's legacy lives on in the form of Ben-Gurion University, and now is the time to stand with Israel and stand with Americans for Ben-Gurion University on this year's Ben-Gurion Day.
And if you're interested in joining Americans for Ben-Gurion University in this free event, you can now scan the QR code on the screen to participate. Ben-Gurion Day in the USA 2024 on December 8th. And the Foreign Ministry has issued a travel warning to Israelis not to travel to South Korea at the current time. The warning came shortly after South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol declared martial law. The warning came shortly after South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol declared martial law. The Foreign Ministry warning urges Israelis to avoid visits. For those already in South Korea, the warning was to stay at home or in places where they are currently residing. And to follow media updates. The martial law declaration was overturned by the parliament after lawmakers forced their way past soldiers into parliament and voted to strike down the decree. Opposition parties are now calling for President Yoon's impeachment. Chaos all over the world. And now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Mostly clear skies are expected tonight around the country, and temperatures should reach lows of around 12 degrees Celsius or 54 degrees Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow, mostly sunny skies are expected, alongside warm temperatures set to reach highs of 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's a wrap for today's news. For the latest updates from Israel on all your devices, be sure to follow our ILTV channel, subscribe to our newsletter, and explore our website, iltv.tv. Stay informed with the latest news straight from the heart of Israel. I'm Ladar Grave-Lazi. Be well, stay safe, and thank you so much for watching.